of the future being different from the present is so repugnant to our conventional modes of thoughts and behavior that we, most of us, offer a great resistance to acting out in practice. These are the words of John Maynard Keynes in 1937. My presentation is on global trends by 2030. The world of 2030 will be radically transformed from our world today. By 2030, no country, whether the US, China, or any other large country, will be a hegemonic power. The empowerment of individuals and diffusion of power among states and from states to informal networks will have a dramatic impact, largely reversing the historic rise of the West since 1750 and restoring Asia's weight in the global economy and ushering in a new era of democratization at the international and domestic level. 4 mega trends are most likely going to be shaping our world within the next 15 to 20 years, that is to 2030. No one force will be dominant anymore. My discussion is going to focus on 4 mega trends that are most likely going to shape our world. And these are: number 1, individual empowerment; number 2, diffusion of power; number 3, demographic patterns and changes; and number 4, food, water, and energy nexus. Individual empowerment. Individual empowerment will accelerate substantially during the next 15 to 20 years, owing to poverty reduction and a huge growth of the global middle class, great educational attainment, and better health care. The growth of the global middle class constitutes a tectonic shift. For the first time, a majority of the world's population will not be impoverished, and the middle classes will be the most important social and economic sector in the vast majorities of countries around the world. If we look at where we are today, the majority of the countries, we only have the working class and the capitalist. There has been an erosion of the middle class. There is no middle class to talk about. But we are saying, as the world changes within the next 15 to 20 years, we're going to see the rise of the middle class again in the majority of the world. And this is largely due to individual empowerment and reduction of poverty in the nations. Individual empowerment is the most important mega trend because it is both a cause and effect of most other trends, including the expanding global economy, rapid growth of the developing countries, and widespread exploitation of new communications and manufacturing technologies. On the one hand, we see the potential far greater individual initiative as key to solving the mounting global challenges over the next 15 to 20 years, that is to the year 2030. So what are we saying? What we are saying is individual empowerment to accelerate owing to poverty reduction, growth of the global middle class, greater educational attainment, widespread use of new communications and technologies, as manufacturing technologies, as well as healthcare advances. The other mega trend that we're going to look at is diffusion of power. What do we mean by this one? Asia will have most likely surpassed North America and Europe combined in terms of global power, based on their gross domestic product. That is the first point. The other one is population size, military spending as well. And we cannot overemphasize technological investment that Asia has done. China alone will probably have the largest economy, surpassing that of the United States a few years just before 2030. In a tectonic shift, the health of the global economy increasingly will be linked to how well the developing world does, more so than the traditional West, who used to be the powerhouses there will not be any hegemonic or dominant power anymore. Power will shift to networks and coalitions in a multipolar world. Mega trend number 3, demographic patterns. The demographic arc of instability is most likely going to narrow. Economic growth might decline in aging countries. 60% of the world's population will live in urbanized areas. And definitely migration will increase. By 2030, the world in which a growing global population will have reached somewhere close to about 8.3 billion, up from the 2012 population of 7.1 billion. 4 demographic trends will fundamentally shape, although not necessarily determine most countries' economic and political conditions and relations among countries. But these trends are fundamental, and they are urging a tectonic shift for the West and increasingly most developing countries. Tectonic shift number 2, or the trend number 2, a still significant but shrinking number of youthful societies and states. Number 3, migration, which will increasingly be a cross-border issue. And number 4, growing urbanization, another tectonic shift, which will spur economic growth but could put new strains on food and water. Mega trend number 4, food, water, and energy nexus. Demand for food, water, and energy will grow by approximately 35%, 40%, and 50% respectively, owing to an increase in the global population and the consumption patterns of an existing and rising middle class that I alluded to earlier on. Climate change will worsen the outlook for the availability of these critical resources. Climate change analysis suggests that the severity of existing weather patterns will intensify, with wet areas getting wetter, dry and arid areas becoming more so. We are not necessarily headed into a world of scarcities per se, but policymakers and their private sector partners will need to be proactive to avoid such a future. Many countries probably won't have the ability to avoid food and water shortages without massive help from outside. Tackling problems pertaining to one commodity won't be possible without affecting supply and demand for others. What are the tectonic shifts that are most likely going to happen between now and 2030? Number 1, growth of the global middle class. Middle classes most everywhere in the developing world are poised to expand substantially in terms of both absolute numbers and the percentage of the population that can claim middle class status during the next 15 to 20 years. Number 2, wider access to lethal and disruptive technologies. A wider spectrum of instruments of war, especially precision strike capabilities, cyber instruments, and bioterror weaponry will become accessible. Individuals and small groups will have the capability to perpetrate large-scale violence and disruption, a capability formerly the monopoly of states. Number 3, definitive shift of economic power to the East and the South. The US, European, and Japanese share of global income is projected to fall from 56% today to well under half by 2030. In 2008, China overtook the United States as the world's largest saver. By 2020, emerging market share of financial aspects is projected to almost double. Number 4, unprecedented and widespread aging. Whereas in 2012, only Japan and Germany have matured beyond a median age of 45 years, most European countries South Korea, and Taiwan will have entered the post-mature age category by 2030. Migration will become more globalized as both rich and developing countries suffer from workforce shortages. Number 5, urbanization. Today's roughly 50% urban population will climb to nearly 60% of 4.9 billion people in 2030. Africa will gradually replace Asia as the region with the highest urbanization growth rate. Urban centers are estimated to generate 80% of economic growth. The potential exists to apply modern technology and infrastructure, promoting better use of scarce resources. Number 6, food and water pressures. Demand for food is expected to rise by at least 35% by the year 2030, while demand for water is expected to have risen to by about 40% in the same period. Nearly half of the world's population will live in areas experiencing severe water stress. Fragile states in Africa and the Middle East are most at risk of experiencing food and water shortages, but China and India are also vulnerable. Number 7, US energy independence. With shale gas, the United States will have sufficient natural gas to meet domestic needs and generate potential global exports for decades to come. Increased oil production from difficult to access oil deposits would result in a substantial reduction in the United States net trade balance and faster economic expansion. Global spare capacity may exceed over 8 million barrels, at which point OPEC would lose price control and crude oil prices would collapse, causing a major negative impact on oil export economies. What are the game changers? Crisis-prone global economy. The questions that arise are, will global volatility and imbalances among players with different economic interests result in collapse? Or will greater multipolarity lead to increased resilience in the global economic order? Governance gap. Will governments and institutions be able to adapt fast enough to harness change instead of being overwhelmed by it? Potential for increased conflict. Will rapid changes and shifts in power lead to more intrastate and interstate conflicts? Wider scope of regional instability. Will regional instability, especially in the Middle East and South Asia, spill over and create global insecurity? Impact of new technologies. Will technological breakthroughs be developed in time to boost economic productivity and solve the problems caused by a growing world population, rapid urbanization, and climate change? The role of the United States. Will the United States be able to work with new partners to reinvent the international systems? Potential worlds. What are the potential worlds that are then going to arise as a result of these global trends? One of them is stored engines. In the most plausible worst case scenario, the risks of intense conflict increase. The US draws inward and globalization stalled. Fusion. In the most plausible best case outcome, China and the US will collaborate on a range of issues, leading to broader global cooperation. Genie out of the bottle. Inequalities explode as some countries become big winners and others big failures. Inequalities within countries increase social tensions. Without completely disengaging, the United States is no longer the global policeman. Non-state world driven by new technologies. Non-state actors take the lead in confronting global challenges. potential black swans that would cause the greatest disruptive impact. Number one, severe pandemic. No one can predict which pathogen will be the next to start spreading to humans, or when or where such a development will occur. An easily transmissible novel respiratory pathogen that kills or incapacitates more than 1% of its victims is among the most disruptive events possible. Such an outbreak could result in millions of people suffering and dying in every corner of the world in just less than 6 months. Number two, much more rapid climate change. Dramatic and unforeseen changes already are occurring at a faster rate than anticipated. Most scientists are no longer even confident of being able to predict such events anymore. Rapid changes in precipitation patterns, such as monsoons in India and the rest of Asia, could sharply disrupt the region's ability to feed its population. European Union collapse. An unruly Greek exit from the Eurozone could cause 8 times the collateral damage as the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy, provoking a broader crisis regarding the European Union's future. A democratic or collapsed China. China is slated to pass the threshold of $15,000 per capita purchasing power parity in the next 5 years or so, a level that is often a trigger for democratization. Chinese soft power could be dramatically boosted, setting off a wave of democratic movements. Alternatively, many experts believe a democratic China could also become more nationalistic. An economically collapsed China would trigger political unrest and shock the global economy. A reformed Iran. A more liberal regime could come under growing public pressure to end the international sanctions and negotiate an end to Iran's isolation. An Iran that dropped its nuclear weapons aspirations and become more focused on economic modernization would bolster the chances for a more stable Middle East that is currently in crisis. Nuclear war or weapons of mass destruction or cyber attack. Nuclear powers such as Russia and Pakistan and potential aspirants such as Iran and North Korea see nuclear weapons as compensation for other political and security weaknesses, heightening the risk of their use. The chance of non-state actors concluding a cyber attack or using weapons of mass destruction is also increasing. Solar geomagnetic storms. Solar geomagnetic storms knock out satellites or could knock out satellites, the electric grid, and many sensitive electronic devices. The recurrence intervals of crippling solar geomagnetic storms, which are less than a century, now pose a substantial threat because of the world's dependency on electricity. US disengagement. A collapse or a sudden retreat of United States power would result in an extended period of global anarchy. No leading power would be likely to replace the United States as guarantor of the international order. Extrapolations of the mega trends would alone point to a changed world by 2030. But it is very imperative to note that the world could be transformed in radically different ways, different from the ones that I've alluded to. In my analysis, I believe that 6 key game changer questions regarding the global economy, governance, conflict, regional instability, technology, and the role of the United States will largely determine what kind of transformed world we will inhabit in the year 2030. Several potential black swans, discrete events, would cause large-scale disruption. All but 2 of these the possibility of a democratic China or a reformed Iran would have negative repercussions. Based upon what we know about the mega trends and the possible interactions between the mega trends and the game changers, we have delineated 4 archetypal features that represent distinct pathways for the world out of 2030. None of these alternative worlds is inevitable. In reality, the future probably will consist of elements from all the scenarios, or will actually consist of totally different aspects from the ones that I've alluded to. Thank you.